Okay, student notes 1.4, solving multi-step inequalities. Before you start solving your inequalities, the main important thing you have to remember is when you multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the inequality. And that's about as messy as you can get to remember to flip your inequality. So I think we don't do that on the first one, but we will get there. Okay, so just like we did when we were solving equations, we're going to draw a line through we're going to draw a straight line down the page, except we're going to make like a railroad track because we want to keep our inequality in the middle and we want to be able to flip it over if we need to, if we're multiplying or dividing by a negative. So we're going to use the same steps we did when we were solving equations. I'm going to subtract 3.5x from both sides. Six minus 3.5 is 2.5. X minus 1 is less than or equal to 4. Add 1 to both sides. 2.5x is less than or equal to 5. Divide both sides by 2.5. And I end up with x is less than or equal to 2. Okay, let's see what happens in number 2. Same steps. I'm going to draw my railroad tracks. And I'm going to subtract x from both sides. This is going to be one of our weird ones where we have to do solutions. My x's cancel out and I end up with 5 greater than or equal to 3. So I need to stop and look at this and ask myself, is 5 actually greater than or equal to 3? And the answer is yes. So any number I put in for x, this will come out to be true because I'm always going to end up with my 5 and my 3, and 5 is always going to be bigger than 3. So my answer is infinite solutions. And I do not know why sometimes this does not write. Okay, infinite solutions for number 2. Move down to number 3. Ooh, too far. Okay. You know, anytime you're doing these videos, you can pause it and work the problem out yourself and then check it by watching the video again. So here we are drawing our railroad tracks. I'm subtracting, well, I have a couple options. I'm going to add 2/10x to both sides. I end up with 0.09 greater than or equal to 1.6 plus 0.2 is going to be 1.8x. Divide both sides by 1.8. And I end up with 0.05 greater than or equal to x. And I'm going to go ahead and flip it around so that my variable's on the left, which is a good habit to get into. And I end up with x is less than or equal to 0.05. So notice that the x is always on the less than side. It's over here on the pointing end, and it also is over here. So that means I flipped it over. I need to also flip my sign so that my x is always going to be less than and my 500ths is going to be greater than. When I do number 4, I need to go ahead and distribute. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times x is minus 6x, less than 3x. I'm going to go ahead and add 6x to both sides. 6 is less than 9x. Divide both sides by 9. And I end up with 2/3 less than x. And since I'm going to flip it around with my x on my left, x is greater than 2/3. If you turn 2/3 into a decimal, that's fine. Okay, number 5 has distributing on both sides. So I'm going to have 20 plus 5x is less than or equal to 6 plus 3x. I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I have 20 plus 2x is less than or equal to 6. Subtract 20 from both sides. 2x is less than or equal to negative 14. Divide both sides by 2. And I end up with x is less than or equal to negative 7. Okay, number 6 has combining like terms and distributing and all kinds of stuff. So let's go ahead and distribute. So I have negative 1/3 n minus 8/3 plus 1/3n less than or equal to 1 minus n. So I have negative 1/3 n and plus 1/3 n, so these guys cancel out. And I have negative 8/3 is less than or equal to 1 minus n. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So if I have 8/3 and I'm subtracting 1, remember that on the right-hand side that this negative sign goes with the n, it does not go with the 1. So I'm subtracting 1, not adding 1. And if I have a 1 over here, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 3/3. So I have a negative 8/3 and a negative 3/3. That makes a negative 11/3, which is less than or equal to negative n. So this is one of those problems where my n is negative, so I need to divide by negative 1 on both sides, which all that does is change the signs. But when I do that, my less than sign is going to become a greater than sign. So I have 11/3 is greater than or equal to n, and I can change that around and say n is less than or equal to 11/3. So this would be the preferred way to write it. Both are correct. Okay, 7 and 8 are finding the error and then correcting it. So for number 7, there's a couple different things you could do. You can either subtract 6 from both sides first, but you can't multiply this by 4 and this by 4 and forget this part has to also be divided by 4. I mean, multiplied by 4. So this part is incorrect right here. So here's the way it should be done, is if you're going to multiply by 4, you multiply x over 4 by 4. You multiply 6 times 4. And you multiply 3 times 4. So you should end up with, taking 24 away from both sides, and you end up with x is greater than or equal to negative 12. The other way to do it, which is the easy way, I probably would have done it to begin with, would be to do it completely different. And I would have x over 4 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 3. I would take 6 away from both sides before I even started. Then I would end up with x over 4 is greater than or equal to negative 3. Then I would multiply both sides by 4. I think it's a little bit easier to see that x would be greater than or equal to negative 12. Both ways come out with the same answer. Whichever way you do it is fine. But just see the difference in, if you go back to this beginning part right here, if you multiply times 4 to get rid of the 4 on the bottom, you have to multiply everything by 4, not just once on the left side and once on the right side. Okay, number 8 does a lot of work. There's some distributing, so you get negative 2 plus 2x, that's correct, and you have 2x minus 7. If you subtract 2x from both sides, those go away, so you have negative 2 is less than negative 7, infinite solutions. So there's not a problem in the math up here. This is all correct, but is negative 2 less than negative 7? No. Negative 2 is actually greater than negative 7, so there actually is no solution, because it is not true. Remember, the larger the negative number value, the smaller it is. Okay, number 9. Okay. Go ahead and draw our railroad tracks. We have 7m minus m, so we have 6m. 6m minus 5 greater than 6m. And right about now you go, hey, wait a minute. 6m minus 5 is never going to be greater than 6m, or is it? Let's take 6m away from both sides. Remember that it's an inequality and that changes things. So I have negative 5 greater than 0. And so, in fact, it is incorrect. Negative 5 is not greater than 0, so there is no solution. All righty, on to the back side. Okay, so here's number 10. Okay, so here's the area. Notice we're doing area, which means we're going to multiply. Okay, so my paper and my page is a little too big, but that's okay. All right, so we're going to write the inequality and then we're going to solve it. So we're going to multiply these two sides together, and it has to be less than 77 when I'm done. So I have 2 times 1.5x plus 2.5, and I'm also going to multiply that times 0.5, and all that has to be less than 77. So if you stop and think about this before you start working, which is what we're going to do to solve it, if I'm multiplying everything by 2, and then I'm also multiplying everything by 0.5, which is the same as 1/2, I'm going to multiply by 2, and then I'm going to multiply by 1/2, which is dividing by 2. So these guys actually cancel each other out. And so before I start multiplying times 2, and then multiplying everything times 0.5, I'm going to cross those out because they're going to cancel each other out. and I end up with 1.5x plus 2.5 is less than 77. So now I can subtract 2.5 from both sides. I end up with 1.5x, and not enough room, is less than 77 minus 2.5 is 75, 74.5. I'm going to divide both sides by 1.5, and I end up with x has to be less than 49.67. Okay, number 11. Okay, we have two cable companies and how much they charge, and we want to know when is Carl's Cable Company costs less overall than Teleview. So let's write our expression for Carl's Cable Company is going to be $55 plus $4 for each movie. So that's going to look like 55 plus 4 times x. And Teleview just charges $110 per month. And we want to know when Carl's costs less than Teleview. So we're going to solve for x because x is our number of movies. We're going to subtract 55 from both sides. We're going to have 4x less than 55. Divide them both by 4. We end up with x less than 13.75. Okay, remember we're talking about movies. So the number of movies has to be less than 13.75, which of course we can't really have 3/4 of a movie. So we're going to say that x would be less than 13. So less than 13 movies and Carl's Cable Company charges less. Don't forget to look at your answer and think about what it represents. In this case, it's going to be the number of movies. And does a decimal make sense? And if it doesn't, you need to round. Okay, number 12. See if I can move this over just a little bit. Not really. Okay, so candidate for class president gets 57 votes. And this is at least, remember at least means greater than or equal to. 30% is 0.30, the total votes. So 57 has to be more than 0.3, 3/10 times however many people, total votes there were. So basically we're just dividing both sides by 0.3 and we end up with 190 is greater than or equal to x. We're going to flip that around. Always try to put our variable on the left. X less than or equal to 190. So there had to be at least, so it can't be any more than 190 people who voted, the number of students who voted, to make sure that 57 is 30% or more of the votes. Okay, 13. Now we're going to get into one of our averaging ones. And we have all these times and a runner who wants the average to be 24 minutes. So we have all these times up here. When we add them together and divide by 5, we want that to be less than 24 minutes. So we're going to have 25.5 plus 24.3 plus 24.8 plus 23.5 plus some other, whatever the time is for the last day. All that divided by 5, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values, needs to be less than 24 minutes. So just by looking at this, I can remind myself that this last value is going to have to be less than 24 by quite a bit, because 25 is greater than 24. 24.3 and 24.8 are close. 23 is less, but we're going to have another smaller value, less than 24, for this to actually average out to be 24. So I'm going to go ahead and add up all the numbers at the top. 25.5 plus 24.3 plus 24.8 plus 23.5, and that adds up to 98.1 plus x divided by 5 is got to be less than 24. So I can multiply both sides by 5. Cancels that out, and I have 98.1 plus x is less than 24 times 5, which is 120. Subtract 98, oops, that's not what I want to do. Subtract 98.1 from both sides, and I end up with x less than 120 minus 98.1 is going to be 21.9. So the last day's time is going to have to be less than 21.9 minutes for the average to end up being less than 24. All right, last problem. Okay, Sonia is watching her temperature to make sure that when it gets over 38 degrees Celsius, she calls a doctor. So we want this formula, when this is all worked out with the Fahrenheit, to be more than 38 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to have the 5/9 times F minus 32 is going to be greater than 38 degrees Celsius, and that's when she calls her doctor. So instead of distributing, I'm going to go ahead and just multiply times the reciprocal of 5/9, which is 9/5. And when I do this, I can think about my 38 being over 1, and I can multiply 38 times 9 and then divide by 5. These guys cancel out. I end up with F minus 32 greater than 38 times 9 and then divide it by 5, and I end up with 68.4. Add 32 to both sides. I end up with F being greater than 68.4 plus 32, 68, 78, 88, 98, 100.4. So as soon as her temperature is greater than 100.4, she's going to call the doctor, because that's her 38 degrees Celsius. Make sure you circled or wrote down if you have any questions, so that you'll be able to do the homework in class tomorrow. And I will see you then.